In my last video, I talked about why I think winning is likely to be easy, because big state systems like ours just don't work. All the evidence of history shows that they do not work. They fall over of their own accord. And it doesn't require a lot of campaigning to bring them down. They bring themselves down. So as a result of that, I think it will be easy for us to win. I want to extend that argument here by looking at white flight. I think white flight means that we are going to win, because white flight knows no politics, knows no political allegiance. It doesn't know any anger. All it knows is a colour. That's why it's called white flight. And it is also an irresistible tide that people do it very good-spiritedly without any malice. And I think that means it will continue, and it means we will win. And as a result, I think white flight means that we will regain England. And it will be easy and could be effortless if we want it to be. Okay, white flight seems to have quite a bad reputation both on left and right. On the left, it seems to be regarded as the ungrateful proles running away from the happy hippie diversity utopia that the left are meting out on them, inflicting on them. And lo and behold, white people just quietly vote with their feet and move away from it. On the right, it tends to be seen as surrender. People are not willing to join various political groups and then form a line, hold it and fight it to prevent the tide of invasion. I'm not sure I agree with, I don't agree with either of those lines as regards white flight. I think white flight is a good thing, and it means that we will win, because it means that it shows that you just can't stop people right across the board saying, I am going to exercise my right to freedom of association, which you can't stop, by making sure that I am amongst my own kind. People who look, think and act like me. In shorthand, people of my own ethnicity, which includes race and culture. And so I think white flight and the goodwill, the absence of malice that accompanies it, I think it also recommends it highly. And I think that is why it's impossible to resist, and why it means we will win. I want to look first at this article in the Financial Times. This subject of white flight appears to have been memory hold in the last 5 years at least. It was getting talked about a bit under a decade ago, a year or two after the 2011 census came in. This article from December 2012 in the Financial Times, it's basically saying, it's not really saying very much about white flight. It's simply saying that it deserves attention and it's not getting any. I think for the reasons I've said, that people in authority see it as awkward and they don't know, there's nothing they can do about it, and it's not threatening their position on the gravy train. That's a crucial thing. So they're just not going to pay it any attention. And if it means inconvenience for the proles who have to emigrate within their own country, well, that's just tough. I think that's the attitude. And journalists, being apparatchiks, being pretty much an apparatchik class these days, they're not going to question it very much either. Why should they? They don't like it. It's all a bit icky for them. But this article in the Financial Times does look at it. The headline is, a couple of weeks ago it was announced that London no longer contained a majority from the UK's main ethnic group, known in the demographers' jargon as the white British, in scare quotes. Okay, it's kind of this article seems to find it a little bit uncomfortable. It's a little bit obscene for the Financial Times. So, in any event, it is a remarkable development for London, and one that was unexpected. However, the London Evening Standard, the capital's main evening paper, tucked it away on page 10 on the day of the announcement, and the BBC London Television News had it as the 7th item that evening. London Mayor Boris Johnson's usually ubiquitous blonde bob was nowhere to be seen. 2 days later, I met a senior official from Mr. Johnson's Greater London Authority who asked about the data. Said, "What's the fuss?" So what you have there is, even in 2012, politicians have worked out that, yes, people are voting with their feet within their own country to get away from all this lovely diversity, but it's not creating any form of political consciousness. So their snouts in the trough, they're riding the gravy train. That is not going to be interrupted. Their careers will continue. They will be able to continue inflicting ever greater diversity and enrichment upon the country, because the people engaging in white flight are simply escaping. They're not creating any form of opposition. Now, the article leaves you in no uncertain terms as to where it stands. In Barking and Dagenham, for example, notorious for the brief success of the far-right British National Party in the late 2000s, the white British population fell by 40,000, almost one-third between 2001 and 2011. I think it fell by 600,000 across London in that period, the white British population. And it carries on like this. It doesn't really say any much apart from saying, I'm all in favour of talking about this, which is, I'm sick of hearing that. I'm sick of these free speech groups. You don't say anything about the subject except that other people should talk about it. Well, if you think it's so important to talk about it, then talk about it. Now let me find the next bit. Yes, so noisily have London's political leaders been celebrating the diversity of their multiracial city that they have forgotten to see what is happening under their noses. If you walk around the city centre, you see racially mixed pavements, shops, buses, tubes, and even workplaces, but there is also a great deal of what the Americans call sundown segregation. If you followed people home, you would find yourself in some of the most ethnically segregated places in Britain. And that, I think, is the lesson, how quietly white flight happens. It doesn't happen with a lot of fanfare. Doesn't seem to happen with a great deal of publicly expressed emotion, let alone political consciousness. Now, the next article is this article from Vox. This is America. The next two articles are from America, but I think they're more modern. I think America is talking about this a little bit more now, just as we're in the depths of silence about it. Vox saying white America is quietly self-segregating, and that is right. I mean, seems to me to be a typical Vox article. There's loads of tables and graphs and call-outs and God knows what, all those percentages, without really saying very much, except kind of expressing a disapproval for this segregation. But I think for me anyway, the key quote is, what this shows is that it's not black and Latino people who are self-segregating into neighbourhoods, a myth that is often perpetuated. Well, in the UK it does show that all people want to be amongst their own kind, including minority populations. They don't really want to, they're not that comfortable living in very substantially majority white areas. A myth that is often perpetuated. Christensen said, rather it's white residents who say they want more diversity but end up looking in less diverse areas. Yeah, that's almost part of there's a polite hypocrisy about white flight, which I enjoy. People will say, yeah, I'm all in favour of diversity. I love black people. I love Muslim people, Latino people. Yeah, it's great. I just want to go and live in a white area. And they go and do it. And it drives the authorities and it drives commentators like this nuts. So I'll quote this final paragraph. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. Okay, if you can translate that, please leave a translation in the comments. And it's something Obama has espoused often during his presidency. But the arc seems rigged so far the other way, and not just in depth but in breadth. It seems segregation is like a strong wave, and you don't swim against the tide. If you do nothing, then we go backward. So there's no doubt what Vox think about it. The message there is that white people are doing it. White people are fleeing and congregating in white areas, very largely, predominantly white areas, and they're not doing it with a lot of fanfare, and the authorities can't intervene. They don't have power to intervene, as this next article shows. Now this one here, this is Forbes, and if you can get past all the adverts and the sign-up boxes, white flight without the actual flight. What this is talking about is how a lot of effort has been put into desegregating American schools, because the two things that people talk about when they, what is thought of as being the code words, or is often put forward as being the code words for segregation or white supremacy, is concern about education, schools, and crime rates. And I don't think that's the case. I think when white people say, I'm moving because I want a better school, I think they mean they're moving because they want a better school for their children. And what this article looks at is how Americans are re-segregating their schools through districts or seceding, communities seceding from the control of a school district, or through charter schools, which then tend to get set up along racial or ethnic colour lines. Now, I mean, you can read all the article. It seems to thoroughly disapprove, but this is what it says. History tells us that white folks who want to keep their children separate can be creative and determined about doing so. Yeah, that's the carry home quote. It's really, as I put it, an irresistible tide. Meanwhile, the white school-age population has decreased steadily, leaving whites a majority minority in US schools, allowing the continued fracturing of school districts with widespread gerrymandering and the erection of 100 little walls that are not productive ways to deal with the new reality. That is left speak. It's the new reality. And why can't you get used to it, proles? Why can't you plebs just get with the program? It's reality. Stop running away from it. That seems to be the argument. And meanwhile, people keep running away with it and just not getting with the program. To that extent, white flight reminds me of that video of the boy putting the eel in the jar. Now, this next article, this is from the UK. Now, this is a UK response from December 2013. Again, all the articles I found were from almost 10 years ago in the UK. America is talking about it a bit more recently. And this is a fellow called Hugh Muir. There's a lot of talk in this article, and it doesn't really say very much. Basically, what it says at the end is, well, we don't know why it's happening. We don't know what's going on. I think this is the sort of left-wing liberal mindset at work here, just not seeing what is quite plain and obvious, which is that people want to live amongst their own kind, specifically people who look, act, think and speak like themselves, and that you cannot stop that. Okay, now data suggests many white people just can't stomach the diversity of cities, but it's more complicated than that. Now, he goes on about it's not just people saying I can't stand diversity, that there's more to it, but he doesn't really. He basically says he doesn't really know what more there is to it. Some, when asked, profess themselves comfortable with diversity. Others appear much less comfortable, but the liberal and illiberal flee in a way that makes it difficult to discern a definite motive. Well, no, this is white flight. It's happening across political creeds, and yet he can't see a motive. Okay. It can't be explained by I don't like diversity, I'm out of here attitude, says Kaufman. That's a fellow called Eric Kaufman. He comes up a lot. When white flight gets talked about, he comes up a lot. He always seems to get wheeled out. I don't like Eric Kaufman. I don't trust Eric Kaufman from the little of his I've read and the little I've seen of him. Okay, there are patterns. People flee cities for bigger houses, better schools. Well, I'll come to that in a minute. White people tend to move towards diversity when young, in small numbers. Otherwise, it would reverse. You would get the opposite of white flight. I don't know what that would be called. When older, white people opt for other white areas when they're older. So do minorities. Basically, people want to mix with their own kind. Now, I think by their own kind, and Professor Kaufman goes on to say, oh, it's not about race, it's about culture. I think that's because when he asks them, when people are asked, they say, no, black people, Asian people, Muslim people, they're fine. I like them, they're great. I just want to live in this area and it's nicer, I'm more familiar with the people. And so that gets stamped with the label culture. I think it's ethnicity, which is halfway between race and culture. That it's people, yes, people want the language patterns, people who speak and look like them, people who speak and act like them, but they also take comfort in having people who look like them. I think we're programmed to do that because that is like a guarantee that person will continue, and their children will continue to look and to act and think like you, and that you'll continue to be reasonably safe and familiar with them. Okay. Now the next article is this one from The Telegraph. Let's talk about the exodus of 600 whites from London. That's between the 2001 and 2011 census. It's behind a paywall, an annoying paywall here. There's this blog I found. I don't know anything. It's called Snouts in the Trough. Seems appropriate to me, but it's cut and pasted a lot of the text from the article. And this article appears to be a bit more angry, and it appears to get it a bit better, although it's certainly groping towards finding out what the reality is. Let me just enlarge that text a bit. Now this is a bit that I want to read out from this article. Fundamentally, none of this is strictly about race, in scare quotes, but rather the cultural constructs we layer onto genetics. I think that puts it fairly close to the way I would say that people use race and racial similarity. We are programmed to use race and racial similarity as a guarantor, as a label of people, of the fact that people will think and speak and act like you. They'll have similar tastes, similar patterns of thought, similar patterns of language, similar sense of humour. And I think that race actually is quite a reliable indicator of that. So yeah, he's saying it's not about race, but it's not strictly about race, but it's layered on top of genetics. Well, race is about genetics. So there are good and bad neighbours of every hue, of course. Yeah, that's a redundant sentence. Yeah. But the scale of white flight demands more than issuing congratulations to the second and third generation children of immigrants who've done well in life and moved from Zone 2 to Zone 5 of the Central Northern Northern Underground lines. It's also absurd to assume that the grandchildren of Cockneys are moving still further out just because their houses have increased in value. I think that is what some people are saying. That's what people are trying to say is they struck it rich with the property boom. They're selling up, buying cheaper houses outside of London and pocketing the difference. I don't think it's that like that at all. So this article is the closest I've seen to getting to it. And what I think is important again is it's saying that people are not doing this don't seem to be doing it out of political or racial allegiance. Now that lack of racial and political allegiance, that seems to be in evidence here in this documentary, which was put out by the BBC in 2016. Really, I'm baffled as to the fact that the BBC did it. I wonder what happened to the careers of the people who made this documentary. It's called Last Whites of the East End Documentary 2016. Now I just want to play about the first minute of it so you get a flavour of it. Hold on, bear with me.
I feel a foreigner in my own borough. We were born here, lived here, finding ourselves marginalised out of the area.
You would never get better than the East End, I don't think. And I feel a lot of the culture is moving out. I don't think there's going to be a lot of East End left. I don't, honestly. I do think it's going to just dwindle out.
And you wonder where they've all gone. You see them all moving out, but you wonder where they've all gone.
The life that we know is finished. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
It's finished.
Now I think three things seem to come out of this documentary. The first thing is what a beautiful, a kind of a very old, well-established, quite deep-rooted and delicate ecosystem appears to have been formed in places like the working class areas of the East End of London. And the documentary does a good job of explaining that. I used to be sort of confused when I heard people saying we were poor, we were poor and exploited, but we were happy, we had each other. But this documentary explains that really well. And you see amongst the people who are interviewed, you see not only a warmth, a family warmth, but also a sort of a friendliness and a kind of gentility and courtesy amongst the people. And that sense of being happy in the East End or in working class communities appears to be borne out by a lot of other people who live there. There's this short YouTube video by this fellow called Louis Heron on growing up in the East End of London in the 1920s and 30s. And that's exactly what he says. He paints it as kind of an idyllic little village, that almost like the land of lost content, the way I might think of a beautiful undulating patch of southern English countryside. That's the way he felt about the East End docks of London. Or this one here. Hold on, let me go. This is Morrissey talking about his youth, talking about his home, and how happy it was, and how close to his family he was. He had all his cousins nearby him, and he liked it. That's a theme of this documentary as well. Let me get rid of those two there. Hold on. So that sort of social ecosystem would seem to be something that was worthy of quite tough protection, because I think it was vulnerable, because it was poor. And that leads me to the second point. The second thing that comes out of it is how the authorities, particularly the central political authorities and their acolytes in local district and county councils, appear to have done the equivalent of taking a flamethrower or a napalm spray bottle into this, like ancient woodland, where you have generations after generations. I think the main family I talked about in this documentary have been in the East End for six generations, and suddenly you have government just pretty much laying waste to it for no very good reason. Just, well, this is good for you to have this diversity, we're going to inflict it on you. And the third thing that comes out of this is that white flight, whilst it's occurring rapidly, it isn't. There doesn't seem to be politics expressed around it. It's not creating. If you if you want to see a swelling tide of political anger and political or class self-consciousness, people grouping together in order to push back and fight back and say this far and no further, you are going to be disappointed. That anger, those politics, they are just not there. People move away quietly, and they do it in the most courteous and gentle-mannered way. And that third point, I think that is the most important. The main plot is about people who are leaving the East End. This is in Newham, a very heavily enriched area, an enriched paradise that white people can't wait to get away from. Now, what I want to do is it centres mainly on one family, where you have the mother, the father, the two daughters, and the two daughters' children, and a very close family. And you sense that the whole this area appears historically to have been based, or the social life appears to have been based on quite a rich network of kinship and friends and colleagues, and mutual reliance amongst people who have it tough. So the families are close, and one of the daughters leaving to go from Newham to Essex, that's a big event, and the mother's crying about it, and she's wondering, how's my other daughter going to get on, because those two are best friends to each other. This next bit I want to show you about is the girl the two girls and the mother talking about why she's moving out, and kind of attitudes to race and diversity. What these people are, they're at the tail end of this white flight. The documentary says it's been going on for 15 years, so from 15 years before 2016, that was 2001. So for the whole of this century, they're saying it's been going on. I suspect the rumblings of it began, as so many things did, at the election of Tony Blair in 1997. But I want to play you this clip about where this girl talks about her attitudes, and she's asked about her attitudes to race, and watch the polite and courteous way she talks about it, with no malice. The last thing she could be accused of is hatred for anyone, I think, but and her mother as well. Let me play this.
Like British, I've all moved out to Essex, so I feel the few that are left in Newham feel that why stay here? all our own have moved out, so why don't we up and move out with them? Primary schools are fine, but as your child gets older anyway, they start getting a mind of their own. Even when Mag goes to secondary schools, as a mum, I will be behind her all the way. And the minute she steps out of line, whether I'm here still, whether I'm in Essex, she will be getting put straight back on that right road. Because that's how we've been brought up.
How would you feel if she came back with a boyfriend who wasn't white?
I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't be happy because obviously that's just how we've been brought up.
To stick to your own
sort
of thing, yeah.
There is old multicultures in every family now. It's just something you have to accept. We're all the same. We're all the same sort of people. It's just I don't think the girls can get their head around it. You do. Oh, man, it ain't my choice. But then if they come home with someone and he was really good to them and no matter what, as long as he's going to look after them, I don't care. As long as my children are going to be looked after and have a nice life.
I think it's been what people say about us.
Yeah, but
I'm not the only mum to say that they wouldn't want their child with a different ethnic group. I mean, like, I think I'm probably one of many, really. But I just think as a mum, you just want... I think it's because of how we are. It's how we've been brought up. It all stems from how you've been brought up. If it's been allowed for you to mix with different cultures, then you can't see any different for your children. We was never allowed to mix with different cultures. We was always told to stick with your own, and that's what we done. It would be hard for me, but it would be hard if an Indian boy brought an English girl home. It would be exactly the same reasons. I mean, you sit on these standards with the Masouds. I can't think of the storyline now, but they did bring a white girl home and Masood was going mental.
They had to have arranged marriages.
That's right. I mean, I love an Indian, so it wouldn't bother me anyway. But the first. But obviously, I wouldn't disown them. But I would prefer them sticks in their own.
I just think everyone can...
Aren't you struck by what nice people they are? Gentle-mannered, polite, and... not stupid. That they, although they're talking honestly and directly, they know the answers that, or they know the questions that are being put to them are fair. They're not trying to avoid the questions, but they also know they're aware of what will get them into trouble. So that these are intelligent, decent people. And they're not motivated by any ideology or any hostility or hatred. You heard her saying, I love Indian people. You heard the mother saying, I wouldn't particularly care as long as he took care of my daughters. I just want my daughters to get taken care of, and if it wouldn't really matter what he looked like as long as he did that. My point there is that white flight is happening amongst people who don't appear to have any political animus or motivation. Now, this next clip is about a little old lady who her husband has died, and instead of doing what you would think she would do, which is to come to depend more upon the family and friends and support network around her, she's now moving out as well. Again, engaging in white flight. But observe how free from any politics or ill will she is.
Time's moving on now, so everyone's moving out. Everyone else moving in, like we've got the foreigners coming in here and they're not taking over, we're letting them. It's like no one ever stood their ground, did they?
Just stop. Bye. You'll be fine. Ain't bye. Oh. Well, you're a lovely boy. I'm going to write you a letter when I get to my new house. Yeah. Been here a long time. Yeah. I hope my next neighbours are as nice as you are. Yeah, bye.
And what you see with her is how warmly she says goodbye to her Somali neighbours. The Somali neighbours have moved in, and previously in the documentary she says how well she gets on with them, how nice they are, they post letters for her. So there's no racial hostility or anything like that. It's possible that she's scared, she knows what will happen to her if she expresses that hostility. It could be there's so much political disapproval, she's decided it's best not to mess with it. I get the impression she's actually decided, well, no, I'll be nice to my neighbours. I think I would do that. If I had a Somali family moving in next to me, I think I'd do what she's done. I'd be nice to them, I wouldn't I'd say, well, there's no point giving them a hard time, but I would make plans to move. And and you could say, well, that's insincere of me. Well, what is sincere about being malicious and nasty to Somali neighbours? It doesn't add anything. It doesn't help any kind of campaign. So I understand exactly why she's done what she's done. But the main point is, again, no politics, no malice, no ill will behind white flight. White flight knows no politics, it only knows a colour. And just to illustrate this, I suspect that she and probably quite a lot of those people in Newham, the white people who are fleeing, voted Labour all the while that they were in Newham and are still voting Labour. Now they're in Essex. And let me just look at this. I think there are about 3 constituencies. There's East Ham and West Ham and Poplar. And I'll just look at one of them just to show you election results. This is since 97. It was a Labour majority. And then since then it's 2019, 2017, 2015, 2010, 2005, 2001, 97. And look at the size of the majority. I mean, 97 it was 25,000 as against 6,000. And that has increased, I guess, with immigrants routinely voting Labour. But even in 97, when white flight was beginning to happen, I think, a massive Labour majority. So even Labour people, Labour is most in favour of our enrichment and is most ferociously enforcing of tolerance, and that even they, Labour voters, engage in white flight. Everyone does, across the board. It is pervasive. And it wasn't well received in all quarters, this documentary. If anyone can tell me what happened to the people, the individuals who made it and directed it for the BBC, I'd be interested to find out. The Socialist Worker, Thomas Tangley Evans of the Socialist Worker, said the last Whites of the East End is based on the racist premise that ethnic diversity is a bad thing. It presents a mythical image of the East End working class communities, where everyone looked after one another before the outsiders came in. Blah-de-blah-de-blah-de, okay. And, of course, the Mayor of Newham, Sir Robin Wales, no less, he said that if it were as negative as made out, it would be a distorted image and contribute to ethnic tensions. Okay. This is why I think that the mass immigration, the invasion, is deliberate, that the harms associated with multiculturalism, the degradation, the sense of a lack of home, the division, crime, poverty, and the squalor that tends to accompany it, and ill will that accompanies it, and the ethnic tensions that accompany it, those are the payload of multiculturalism, which is why politicians are doing it, because it grinds us down and makes us easier to rule. And well, you can see that in Europe. People just are getting out because they are emigrating within their own country to get away from it. But just to repeat, my main point is that white flight happens across the board. You don't have to have any political opinions to engage in white flight. Pretty much everyone does it. The more people do it, the more people do it. You see in that documentary, those remaining few people, eventually they say, well, everyone else is gone, and that makes it even more diverse from our point of view. We just can't take it anymore. We're going to go as well. The more it happens, the more it happens. And it's just something that people choose to do. I think it is an evolutionary urge, this urge to be amongst people of your own kind, and what all of the evidence suggests is there is no truth whatever to the fact that people who do it are a bunch of right-wing bigots. They don't express themselves in the vaguest political terms, so far as I can see. That means it will continue to happen. It will continue to happen across the board. Now, going back to what I said in the my previous video about how society is likely to collapse. If that happens, I think the evidence from white flight shows that people will then, once they're freed from the boot of big state enforcement, people will do what they want to do, what they voluntarily do, which is to mix amongst their own kind. And I think that the white flight segregation that is talked about in these articles and hinted at in this documentary, that will harden and accelerate, and you will get a very sharp divide between English people and invader populations. As a result of that, what I think you will then get is a change in attitudes that I would characterise as being an earthquake followed by a landslide. The earthquake being the radical change of attitudes, the sudden change of attitudes that happens when the state breaks down. The landslide, that being the long drawn out but quite fast moving change of attitudes that follows as people gather and organise their own lives, their own areas, their own systems along ethnic lines. And to put it to you this way, what I say to people is, if the state falls down and you have to find law, as you will, because when the state breaks down, the immediate problem that concerns everyone is that crime explodes, it rockets, everyone is naked before the storm of criminality because it just gets out of control. And the one thing people have to have is law. If the state is gone and the state can't provide it, you will need to develop systems of law that operate on along mutualist lines, a bit like voluntarily joining a club, a self-government type situation. And that's why what I think we're looking at is a historic move from a statist system towards a kind of a voluntary self-governing mutualist situation where you simply join and you join so that you can live with other people who are subject to the same system of law, and so that you can show third parties that you are subject to law and legal control, so that they can trust you, so that if you bounce a check on them, if you burgle their house, if you assault them, you can then get into trouble, so you can be trusted to abide by the law. I think that will cause people to voluntarily adopt systems, rules of law like a club. And when people do that, people, I think, will do it on really very strict ethnic lines. People will do what the people... If you see what people in these documentaries have done, with all the suppression, the thought control, the vilification, the snobbery that they're subjected to from the state and the state's acolytes, they're still engaging this. They want to mix with their own kind. Once that's gone and people are free to exercise their right to freedom of association, I think there's no way people are automatically going to say, well, actually, I don't want invader populations moving into this area. I can guarantee you that young mum who was in that video that you saw, she must be now in Essex. I bet, now she's been in Essex for 6 years, I'll bet her prayer nearly every night is, please don't let that invasion extend to here. I don't want to have to emigrate again within my own country. And if people I think just will automatically, even without her sense of experience and kind of underlying political consciousness about this, people will say, I just want to be safe without this multiculturalism. I don't want it, therefore I'm going to restrict my area to my own ethnicity. On the back of that, I think you will then get and that I think is the earthquake. Then I think you'll get the landslide effect that follows that, which is then a sense of patriotism, also almost nationalism, a sense of togetherness and rediscovering the aggressively, ferociously suppressed sense of patriotism and nationhood and home and the culture around it, rediscovering that and actually finding they like it and they're proud of it. And on the basis of that, I think that ethnic segregation will become really quite proud. What I think you'll then see is the English areas becoming much richer than the invader areas, because English people are much more entrepreneurial, much smarter than a lot of the invader populations, and the conditions in the invader areas will plummet fast. And I think it'll be very easy for those white areas simply to expand out and to buy up the invader areas so that the invader populations take the money and go back to a country they're familiar with, a country where they're amongst their own kind, and a country where they can survive much more easily than they can in a UK where they don't really have much contact with English people and where there's no welfare to feed off. So I think my point about white flight is how naturally that will happen. You don't have to campaign in order to achieve it. And that again is answers the question, what should you do? I don't think you need to engage in really strong, fierce campaigning over the next few years that this system survives. I think if you just put your feet up and wait for the system to bring itself down, that's enough. I doubt we're going to be able to bring forward the date of that breakdown. I doubt we'd be able to put it off if we wanted to. What I think is important is if the system breaks down, be alert to what you need, and what you will need is law. And look, don't sign up to some renegade colonel with a private army behind him, or some horrible theocrat, or some warlord, or some drug gang leader. Look for transparent, procedural systems of law that you can join, and that really provide a full code of law, because that is what you're going to need, plus the enforcement mechanism to enforce it. And if you do that, I can guarantee you just won't want invader populations within that system, because it'll cost you a lot more to join a system like that, because there'll be a lot more policing of crime to do. And this I hope, in a much more long-winded way than I had intended, I hope this explains why I think we are likely to win through this procedure, particularly white flight, which illustrates how we will win easily. It could be effortless, and as a result, I think we will regain England.